Good morning and welcome to the YMCA of Delaware Staff Learning Conversation for Deaf Awareness Month. I'm Thomas Wallace, Senior Executive Director of the Western Family YMCA, and I am Chair of the YMCA of Delaware's Equity Team. I use he, him pronouns and have the great pleasure to join you all this morning. Some housekeeping items before we start the call. Please note that this meeting will be recorded and closed caption is enabled in this event. If you desire, you can turn on closed caption on your end. Please remain muted unless you are the active speaker, as cross-talking causes transcription errors. Our interpreter today will be Yvonne Patterson. Yvonne will be spotlighted throughout the event. Thank you, Yvonne. Also, the best way to view this event is in gallery mode in Zoom. You can access gallery mode through the three dots on the right of your screen and set it as gallery mode. Today, we will be learning about deaf culture and the deaf community. September is Deaf Awareness Month, a time to celebrate the rich cultural history of deaf awareness of the deaf community and continue the work of advocating for the rights of deaf people everywhere. Since Deaf Awareness Month is about sharing knowledge and resources, we thought we'd create this space to learn about each other, get more insight from our colleagues' lived experiences with deaf culture, and foster a greater sense of belonging, including people with diverse abilities. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge our land. We are situated on sacred land. Today, I join you from the unceded lands of the Lenni Lenape people and acknowledge their care of these lands over time. At the Y, we aim to create space to learn with passion, to listen with intent, and to understand the depth and wisdom within our communities across the state of Delaware. This community conversation celebrates the diversity and richness of what unites us as people. Today is Hispanic Heritage Month. September 15th through October 15th is celebrated nationwide and as National Hispanic Heritage Month. It traditionally honors the cultures and contributions of both Hispanic and Latino Americans as we celebrate heritage rooted in all Latin communities. Now I would like to share a short video from our branch DEI team for Deaf Awareness Month. We can all learn a little bit of American Sign Language that can help us make deaf and hard of hearing people feel more welcome at our Y. It gives me the great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Lucy Williams, membership representative of the Western Family YMCA. Lucy, please share your sign name and a little about yourself. You're on mute. You're on mute, Lucy.
Thanks. Believe me. So my sign name is simply just an L. We would wave side to side. So in my family, the signs or our name signs were mostly pretty simple. So we just kept it at that.
And just tell me a little bit about yourself, Lucy.
Okay. So ASL is my first language. Growing up with deaf family members, both of my parents are deaf. So I'm considered a CODA, which is the acronym for the Child for Deaf Adults. So growing up in a culture, a deaf culture, was different than the traditional family. Some positive aspects were that I knew a second language, so that was special. And I could communicate with a whole different, group of, a whole different community, a whole different group of people. So oftentimes we'd go to things like Deaf Fest and just different kind of events that we could meet different deaf families, that sort of thing. Some other differences, however, though, growing up in the deaf family, most of the time, it was difficult. I would often be the interpreter in our family. So before the 90s, when the disability laws were kind of put into place, they didn't offer interpreters usually. So I would do interpreting for, school conferences and, even for doctor's office, things like that. So, the interpreters weren't always provided. So, and technology wasn't yet developed for the deaf culture. So, and for deaf people. So I was often used as the proxy interpreter. So if call came in, I'd have to interpret that as well. So that's kind of some of the difficulties, but other than that, I mean, that's simply, just the only parts that were, like that.
Thank you, Lucy.
So, positive and negative,
Thank you for sharing. Next, I'd like to introduce Bridget DeLuzio. Bridget is the Director of Aquatics at our Dover YMCA. Bridget, would you mind sharing your assigned name and then just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Bridget DeLuzio. My sign name is the letter B, tapped on my cheek. I am the mother of two deaf and hard of hearing children, one 15, one 17. And my fiance is profoundly deaf. So been a part of the deaf community for almost 18 years now. And I've been signing that long.
Thank you, Bridget. And Mindy Felling, Delaware Statewide Programs Coordinator for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Mindy, would you share your sign name and just a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Mindy Failing. This is my sign name because I was born with big dimples. So that's why my sign name is the M on the chin. And I was born to a hearing family. Everybody in my family was deaf except myself. And I grew up here in Delaware. And my whole family learned ASL to communicate with me since they found out I was deaf. I did go to the deaf school here in Delaware when I was younger, and then I transferred to a mainstream school, and I graduated from my home school. And I did use an interpreter throughout my school experience. And the role that I have now is I work in the state and I travel to all different school districts. And I want to make sure that their deaf and hard of hearing students are getting complete access, their accommodations, hearing technology, and any type of communication needs they have.
Thank you for sharing, Mindy. Before we get into our discussion, Mindy Felling from the state would like to share some information about deaf community with us.
Before I start explaining about deaf and hard of hearing, I want to start with terminology. And it does bother us in the deaf community when you use the words hearing loss or hearing impairment. And the reason why, it's like a negative connotation. So a lot of us are okay that we are deaf or hard of hearing. And however we want to identify ourselves, that's how we say that, but avoid using the words hearing loss or hearing impairment, because there's nothing really wrong with us. We just hear differently and we access language and communication differently. So a lot of us are very proud to be deaf or hard of hearing. Next slide. So if you're looking at this picture, you may have seen this before, or you might not have, but this is called an audiogram. It shows the hearing levels of what we can hear, the different sounds that we can hear. Normal hearing levels are about 20 decibels or above. So that's above that yellow banana looking thing. So it's above that you can hear all these different types of sounds. And then there are people with mild hearing loss that it drops to about 30 to 40 decibels. Maybe about 50 decibels is included, and that's in that yellow banana. And that's what people can hear or what they might not be able to hear. They can hear some words with specific vowels or consonants, and they might be missing some of those. But keep this in mind that they can hear these things when the environment is quiet. Now, with moderate hearing loss, of course, it drops just below the banana. So they might not be able to hear words. They usually can't hear words, but they can hear sounds like loud noises, barking, the vacuum. And when you have severe hearing, a severe hearing level, then you are able only to hear cars, trucks, lawnmowers. And then when it's the profound, that's me. I have a profound hearing loss. I am deaf. I hear nothing, and I love it. It's my way of life. I grew up that way, and I sleep well at night. But I can't hear like an airplane, you know, something that is so loud. And plus, I can feel it as well. And I do love listening to music, but it has to have like the bass has to be really high. I broke my car speakers one time because I had the bass on so loud. And I wanted to share this because everybody hears differently and how they access sounds is different. So when you meet a deaf or hard of hearing person, not everybody is we're not all the same. We don't hear the same. So I want to make sure that you do understand that. And the same with people with one hearing loss, you know, or unilateral hearing loss, unilateral hearing loss. They might only hear out of one ear and not the other, but they still hear things differently. That they have to figure out where it's coming from. And some deaf people learn ASL, some do not. It is their preference on how they want to access language. But we still have to make sure that we provide them the accommodations. Next slide, please. So talking about accommodations, communication and access, and how we can help each other. I think this will be very beneficial for everybody. So you want to make sure that the light in the room, because with the hearing differences, we depend more on our eyes. So I want you to make sure that the lighting in the environment is not too bright, or if it's too dark or there's a light behind you, it hurts our eyes. Or if it's too dark, we can't see you. Because sometimes people can lip read and they hear a little bit. So they use the lip reading to support what it is that's being said. So lighting is very important. So even whether they use ASL or not. And the second thing is be aware of the background noises. I know a lot of places have music going on, or people are talking, maybe some very loudly. Like when you go to the YMCA, there might be music playing in the background. People were talking, or the equipment is making noise. So if you meet a deaf or hard of hearing person, make sure that you're kind of close to them and try to minimize the background noise if possible. And there is hearing technology, and we do have hearing aids. And the reason why I said hearing aids is because the aid, it just amplifies the sounds. Like, for example, I am profoundly deaf and I hear at 100 decibels. Hearing aids can help me increase about 20 to 50 decibels, depending on the hearing aid. So it's like it amplifies it. I still don't hear all of the words. I'm not there in that top part of the banana, but the amplification in the background, sometimes hearing aids will help that. Like I can hear you talking, but I'm also picking up other sounds that are louder than what you're saying. So keep that in mind about hearing aids. They're a great tool. They're very helpful, but it's not always perfect. And the same with cochlear implants. Cochlear implants are a great tool, but it doesn't make a deaf or hard of hearing person hear the same as a hearing person. The sound is more robotic, and people have to learn, and they train themselves. They're trained in how to hear with the cochlear implant. It's a different type of hearing. Again, it's a great tool, but it's not on the same level as a hearing person. And each person has their individual choice on how they want to access sound. Now, talking about accommodations, like, I just let you know that I can lip read. And the reason why is because I grew up with people who use spoken English a lot, that some of them didn't know ASL, and that's how I survived. I had to try to figure out what they were saying. But lip reading is not always perfect. It's actually 80% of the time it's a guessing game. So when I'm looking at you, I might catch one word and then I have to try to figure it out what you're trying to say. So some people are fine with lip reading. Some people say, nope, I want to make sure that I'm getting all of the information and I'm getting it correct. So you might have to ask the deaf or hard of hearing person, how do you like to communicate? Do you want to write things down? Do you want to lip read? If you can sign, that's great. But you can also even use your phone to text each other. But I do want to explain a little bit more talking about ASL. ASL is a language. It's a fully visual language, and that's why the deaf community and the deaf culture, that's why they use ASL, because it's full visual access. Next slide, please. So what you can do is become more deaf aware. When you meet a deaf or hard of hearing person, make sure that they're looking at you. Because if they're not, you need to tap them on the shoulder. It's okay to tap them on the shoulder, or you can wave at them to get their attention before you start to talk, or before you write, or whichever communication mode you choose. And again, make sure that the lighting is good and you're in a good place with the correct lighting, that the light behind you is not super bright. And without not a noisy environment. And when you're looking or talking to that person, maintain eye contact, because that's how you know that they'll continue talking and paying attention. If you look away, then that means your conversation is done. So make sure that you keep looking at them. If you're not comfortable looking at their eyes, you can look at their whole face or their hands. That will be okay. I am so sorry. It's just all of a sudden got dry. I'm so sorry. Okay. And when you're talking, if you're using spoken English, make sure that you're speaking clearly, not very fast and not too slow. Make sure you talk at your normal pace. That's how we can lip read, and that's how some of us can hear. So just speak normally. And also, when you're using your voice, do not talk very loud. You don't need to shout at us. You don't have to use screaming. That does not help at all. Just talk normal. And also, when you're talking, if I don't understand what it is that you're saying, if you could repeat yourself, but don't repeat it exactly how you said it. Maybe say it in a different phrase, like phrase it a different way. Like if you say, go to the bathroom, you can point to the bathroom, like where it is. So repeat if we don't understand, but not the same exact words that you were already saying. Next slide. I think that's it.
Thank you very much for sharing that great information and helping us all become more deaf aware and for connecting us to community. Um, at this time, we're going to move into a Q&A session so we can learn more about the panelists and their experiences with the deaf community. I'm going to start with a few questions that I have here. And Bridget, I'll start with you. Tell us your story and what are your connections to the deaf community?
Sure. So when I, sorry, when I was three, or sorry, when I was wrong, when I was in third grade, I had read a book about Helen Keller, and in the back of the book was the manual alphabet for American Sign Language, and I learned that. Went through school in middle school, met a deaf student. And she was in our school. She'd always sit by herself. I befriended her. We'd write notes back and forth to one another because finger spelling every word is not feasible. Fast forward, my third child was born, and when she was born, they told me she failed her hearing test. So after repeated tests, we discovered that she's deaf. She was fitted with a hearing aid. And I started learning sign language when approached by a deaf woman who saw her hearing aid as an infant and asked me if I signed with her. She was very kind, took the time to talk with me and educate me about using sign language and how much more it would benefit. And it truly has. It opened up a whole brand new world. My daughter struggled with speech. And she, so delayed speech, which is typical. And, but she was signing as her first language. ASL was her first language. And so our whole family learned. And that was almost 18 years ago. My fiance actually lost all of his hearing in 2020. He woke up one morning with no hearing, but because we had a solid base in sign language and he had been learning, it was like we never missed a beat. And then my 15-year-old son, last year, he started presenting with as hard of hearing in his right ear. So he has a unilateral hearing loss. And that's our family. We're thoroughly involved with the deaf community. We're a multilingual family, and that's us.
Bridget, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to move on to you next, Lucy. Lucy, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little more of your story and what connects you to the deaf community.
Well, like I say, my parents are deaf, so me being a coda, sign language was my first language. So, growing up, I do have a sister, so she's also in the deaf community. She works with the deaf doing interpreting. So she's chosen to do that. I find that I like to see all kinds of people. So in this case, I've chosen not to be an interpreter, but she's really involved in the community in that sense. So, it's within our family in many ways, more ways than one. So like I say, growing up, it was, with us being the two daughters, we would do a lot of the communicating. We would do, if the phone rang, we would have to take those calls. If they weren't someone that also had a TTY, which was something we used, a based system we could use to communicate with other deaf people, but they also had to have a TTY. So without that, they would have to rely on me and my sister to kind of be those interpreters on the phone. So growing up, I had to be a grown up very early on in that sense, so I'm really appreciative now that there's so much technology to make it so much easier. I mean, there's even apps on your phone where a person signing, a little cartoon person signs, so it's really come a long way. So I do appreciate that now that I'm grown, but growing up, there's a lot of responsibility, being in that kind of family.
Thank you, Lucy. And I have the great pleasure of working with Lucy at the Western YMCA. And this is my opportunity to thank her in front of all of you for helping us at the Western YMCA when we have someone deaf or hard of hearing come in. She helps us connect to that community. So thank you for that as well, Lucy.
My pleasure to do it. Thank you. It's my pleasure to do it. Yeah.
All right, next is Mindy. Mindy, tell us a little bit more of your story and what connects you to the deaf and hard of hearing community.
I was born as the only deaf child in my family and even in my small community. The family that I grew up with, they were wonderful. They learned ASL. They didn't treat me any different. They didn't have like low expectations of me. And I was involved in my school activities, sports. I went to a deaf school, and that was my deaf community. And I socialized there. I learned there. I learned how to communicate. And that's where I got my foundational language. And then I transferred back to a public school. I had an interpreter with me. And I was very fortunate because the hearing community there, they learned ASL. At that time, there was no technology. There was not an iPhone, no computers. And now I'm feeling a little old. But back then, I had my access and I was able to communicate with my peers, you know, using ASL. They all learned it as well. And I had an interpreter during the school day. And then after school hours, I didn't have an interpreter because we could communicate. We played sports after school, the different events that I was involved in. And then I went to college. And the college had a deaf program. And that's where I was like, finally, this is so nice. It was 100% accessible. You know, everything went very well. And I graduated and I came back home to Delaware and I worked in the technology field. And that's when I realized that I was meeting other deaf and hard of hearing people in the state of Delaware that didn't have the same opportunities that I had. They didn't have that complete access to education. So they were not reaching their max potential. So that's why I decided to go back to school, become an educator. And then I went into educational leadership. And here I am as an administrator because I want to give the best to our deaf and hard of hearing children. And I've been in this field for 22 years working with children. And it's so nice. It gave me purpose. Because these children need advocates. A lot of deaf children have never met deaf or hard of hearing adults, so they don't know what to do. So and the families have never met other deaf and hard of hearing adults. And here in Delaware, it's such a small state, so that means that we have a small deaf community. There's only 1 out of 1,000 people who have some type of differing hearing levels, whether they're deaf, hard of hearing, unilateral hearing. But again, it's nice to be able to go out into the state, meet people and educate them. Like here at the YMCA, you're very inclusive and I'm, you know, explaining things to you and you're becoming more aware. And that's happening in a lot of other places in the state, that they're becoming more aware and giving us more access and letting us and being more inclusive. And a lot of different opportunities have been given. But that's my life story. And I love the way that I am. I love being deaf. I know that some people, they're like, I can't imagine. And it's because you grew up with the ability to hear. I grew up with a different ability, and that's okay.
Thank you for sharing, Mindy. And you've gone a little bit into the next question. So I'm going to stay with you and ask the next question I have here, which is, What is it that you wish the people in the community to know about deaf people, hard of hearing people, and the deaf culture?
Don't treat us differently. You know, we're visual people, and we're not auditory, which is okay, but we communicate different. Don't be afraid to learn ASL. I know that it's very common where people, they think that they can't do it. They're like, I might look stupid, but, so it makes them easier. It makes them feel like it's easier to walk away and they don't try to learn ASL. And I get it. I understand that feeling, but please don't treat us any different. And we actually will appreciate your effort. So go ahead and learn, ask questions. We're happy to help you. We're happy to teach you ASL. And I do want to let you know that fingerspelling in ASL, that's very difficult to learn. And I think that's what makes people afraid to want to learn sign language, because they're like, I can't fingerspell. But once you learn the language and then you learn fingerspelling, things will go a lot easier for you. Like when we sign cat, we sign it this way because of the whiskers. And there are a lot of signs that are iconic and they make sense, like cat, door, because of the way that it looks. But I know that the fingerspelling part of it is what is a little bit more difficult. But I also believe that communication equals connection. So a lot of us want to have a connection with you. We want that. But it does take both of us. I would be willing to teach you. I will write it down. I will make that connection with you. And if you do the same for us, that would be wonderful. We'd be thrilled.
Thank you, Mindy. Lucy, same question to you. What is it you wish people in the community to know about deaf people, hard of hearing people, and deaf culture?
I would just, comment just as Mindy, deaf people are fully capable. They can read, they can understand. My dad used to water ski and drove his boat. So he was even awarded Deaf Man of the Year. So, for his work with the community. So they're very capable and can do anything anyone else can do. They just need an opportunity to do it or have the accessibility to do it.
Thank you, Lucy. And Bridget, same question to you.
Well, I'm echoing the same sentiments as Mindy and Lucy. And I mean, quite honestly, the deaf community is one of the most welcoming communities that I have ever had the privilege of being involved in. And they appreciate the effort that anyone makes to communicate and to connect, because that's important. It's always, we all look for that, right? Connection.
Absolutely. And thank you all for sharing. I'm moving on to the next question, which is please share an experience or situation with us where you witnessed or experienced deaf people not feel welcome or feel welcome in the community. I'll reread that again so you all can get that. Please share an experience or situation with us when you witnessed or experienced deaf people not feel welcome or feel welcome in the community. And I'll start with you first, Lucy.
I would probably have to say that I've noticed that not all public places have closed captioning for the deaf when there's televised programs on. For example, I take my dad to lunch at his favorite place, and we always sit by the big TV so he can watch the news or whatever it is. They don't offer closed captioning there. However, there's no volume either. So I almost find that closed captioning would even benefit more than just the deaf in that situation, because the volume's not on anyway. But in this sense, even if it were to be on, my dad doesn't have to try and lip read the news. It would just be, helpful if we could always kind of consider that and always offer the closed captioning. So I've noticed that's where I feel that sometimes, the deaf aren't included in that sense, but kind of left out.
Thank you, Lucy. Bridget?
Sure. In 2020, our youngest was in the hospital, And so my fiance and I were there, and there were, I mean, we were in the midst of COVID, so there were no communicator masks, which is a mask that has a clear screen so you can see lips. Makes it very, very difficult. There was a shortage of them. And we had plenty of nurses or doctors that would refuse to drop their mask. So my fiance could read their lips and find out what was going on, you know, until they finally had an interpreter available. And there was one specific doctor who refused so much so that he would turn his back to my fiance. So, you know, so he wasn't even looking at him. He would just look away and just talk to me, which was completely unfair and very one-sided. But we've seen the flip side of that, where you know, we had my son's main nurses who would walk in, drop their mask and stand across the room and have a conversation, or the resident doctors that would come in and just write on a whiteboard. They brought us a huge whiteboard and would just write everything out, just so there was equal access.
Thank you, Bridget. And Mindy, would you share with us an experience or situation where you witnessed or experienced deaf people not feel welcome or feel welcome in the community?
I would like to start with the not welcome first. Like Bridget had said, the masks were horrible. That was so hard. We had a very hard time because their mouths were covered, because our face is part of our communication. So with the mask on it, you couldn't lip read. So we became very frustrated. It was very difficult. But the good news is that a little bit later during the COVID pandemic, they developed a clear mask. So if you need to wear a mask at any time, I encourage you to get these clear ones. And you can see our face, our mouths, you can see that. So that was very difficult. But another experience where I did not feel welcome at all was, well, it still happens even today. And one time I went to Florida and I wanted to rent a jet ski just for fun. And they told me no. They said they said deaf people can't ride jet skis. I was like, I have a driver's license. And that was like another thing that people were saying, you can drive? Yeah, we can. I have my license, I drive, I get around, and I also have a motorcycle license as well. But some places they're like, nope. The jet ski, they were like, no, because you're deaf. What? So it still happens. I don't get angry at them. It's just that they're ignorant. They don't know any better. And so I take the time to try to educate and explain things to them, but sometimes it doesn't work. So that is where things become very frustrating for me. But on the positive side, where I do feel welcome, is many places. It depends on the people, it depends on the place, and I feel welcome quite often. But I just had a wonderful experience, and it was like one of the best. I was a caretaker for my sister when she went to get her surgery, and it was just, I was the only one that could go with her. So we're waiting, and the surgery's over, and we were sitting in recovery, and the nurse came in, and she could sign. She was so fluent in ASL, and I could ask her questions. I could have a conversation with her, and I had full access, and I knew what to do with my sister after that. And I found out that the nurse is a child of deaf adults, and her parents are both deaf. So it was a wonderful experience. But in general, I do feel welcome most of the time.
Thank you, Mindy. And one more question that I have, and that is, what actions can we take as a community to be more welcoming and inclusive? And I will throw that to you first, Bridget.
I would just say be patient, be kind. Take your time, and regardless of how frustrated you may feel in the moment, every effort that you're making to communicate is is helping the deaf or hard of hearing individual be more connected, and you're helping foster a better relationship.
Thank you. Mindy?
First, I want to say thank you for taking the time to join us and let us talk about deaf awareness. And really what I want to say, and this is something I say every day, don't treat us any different. We're human just like you are. So communication is the connection. And if you don't know ASL, it's okay. We appreciate any effort that you give. And don't worry about feeling that you're not competent or that you don't know. Just go ahead and ask. We would be thrilled to make that connection with you, and we'll figure it out. We'll figure out the communication. We'll do it together. We can all figure that out. And that is what will make the connection successful. We'll feel included, and you'll feel great about yourself as well.
Thank you, Mindy. And Lucy, how can the community be more welcoming and inclusive?
I agree with them as well too. Also maybe we host events, and that will bring the deaf together and kind of, in new places, like for example, like and things like that. I think that would help, people that, they would associate with their alumni and things like that, outside of that, just on a personal level, just even learning some sign, some simple signs, just so that you can, do some simple communicating with them. That goes such a long way, I think, with the deaf community, just to show the effort, that you want to be able to communicate with them.
Thank you, Lucy. And mentioning learning signs, we will have an opportunity to do that as well. But before we do, I'm going to open the floor for any questions from our audience. I want to make sure that we get all this great information in, and I know my staff from Western is about to laugh when I say this because I'm a stickler on meeting time. So I want to get us out of here in time, but I want to make sure we get all the information in. So please submit any questions that you may have, but we do want to get off to learning some signs as well. And to ask a question, you can simply put it in the chat or you can raise your hand. The question I have, let me see, as I'm trying to field them here. DPP program for the deaf community. I'm assuming someone asked, is there a DPP program for the deaf community?
What is DPP?
Diabetes Prevention Program, a program that we run here at the YMCA. And Lucy, you were involved with that, correct?
I was going to say, I think I'm trying to chime in. I think currently we don't have one. We have one for, I believe, Spanish speaking class. We have one of those that we have begun there. But I do know that Peijian has kept me in on an email back with Kat, who directs the DPP program. So I think that could be on the table in the future. That would be, I think, really nice.
Yeah. That would be great. Something we certainly have to consider and look into. I have another question here. How do deaf people experience music? Mindy, you want to take that one?
Like I mentioned before, I broke my car speakers. So I do love music. I like the rhythm, the bass. You just have to make sure that you can feel it. So we do go to concerts and we get to sit in the front row, and sometimes we get an interpreter there. So we do see the lyrics and the interpreter signing the music, and we can feel the music with the bass. But again, there are different types of hearing that people can hear all those different levels. So there is a group of deaf and hard of hearing people who love to perform signing songs. They sign them, they follow the lyrics, you know, what the song is saying, what it's about. And deaf people do love signing it, and I love watching them. There are a lot of deaf people who love to dance. They follow the music, they can dance, except for me. I'm not good. Like, some hearing people don't like to dance either. So it's the same with the deaf community. You know, some of us love to dance, some of us just can't.
Thank you, Mindy. Is sign language international? Bridget, you might want to take that one.
Sign language is definitely not international. There are many, many different sign languages. So just because you know American Sign Language does not mean you can go to France and use ASL there. You couldn't go to England. So it's not universal. But yeah.
Yes and no. American Sign Language, ASL, is not universal. It is not. So we follow the English word, the words, the same with other countries. Like in France, they have LSQ, that's their sign language, the same as Spanish. And other countries, they have their own sign language. However, there is a international sign language, and that is for like deaf World Federation Games, the Deaf Olympics, and there are a lot of international deaf events. So when we go to those type of events, we use that international sign language there. It's not perfect. We all try to figure it out, but there are some standard and common signs other than just the international sign language.
Thank you, Mindy and Bridget. And we have a number of great questions coming in, and hopefully we may be able to get some answers to you in another platform. What I want to do at this point is ask one more question and then lead into our breakout rooms. And that question is for the three of you. What is your favorite sign? And then after that, we'll go into our breakout rooms to learn some signs.
That's a tough question. Really, it depends on who I'm talking to and which word I want to use. But I think love, I love you. Yeah.
And Bridget?
That's a hard one, but I think I spent a lot of time like, oh, that's so cool.
Like that. Thank you, Bridget. And what about yours, Lucy?
So for talking with friends, I guess with deaf friends and stuff, I really like, what's up. So I always like that. Growing up, my parents would always remind me, if your friends are interested in learning to sign, teach them an actual sign. Try not to get so fixed on the letters. Just like Mindy was saying, it's just too hard, but if you pick a sign, it can be easy to remember. So I would always do lion. It's always one of my favorites, because that's easy to remember. They're not going to forget that one. And it's more than just your hands. You can kind of, you put your whole body into it. So I always like to teach that one. So those are my two favorites.
Thank you very much. Thank you for teaching us those signs. And now it's time to learn more. So at this point, I would like to put everyone into a breakout room so we can learn more American Sign Language. We just want to remind you that entering the breakout rooms may take a few seconds and that the camera may be turned off during the process. Trainers in the breakout room or the host will help re-enable your camera. Thank you, learn the signs, and have fun. Waiting a little bit longer to see if anyone else is coming in from any of the rooms. All right. Just looking for the host here. That gives me the cue that we have everyone back. Okay. All right. So I want to wrap up by saying thank you to our wonderful guests for their time and commitment to supporting and educating our why. We believe that all people, no matter our backgrounds, our ability, we all deserve to be treated with dignity, compassion, and respect. At the YMCA of Delaware, all are welcome and belong. Thank you all, and thank you for all you do for our community. And thank you. Have a beautiful day.